Venezuela should be one of the richest countries on earth. Not rich by developing world standards. Not rich by Latin American standards. Rich by global elite standards. This single country sits on the largest proven oil reserves in human history. More than Saudi Arabia. More than Russia. More than the United States. In fact, every major oil power on the planet combined would still struggle to match what lies beneath Venezuela's soil. And yet today, this country can't keep its lights on. Its currency became so worthless that people stopped counting money and started weighing it. Its hospitals ran without electricity. Its shelves emptied. Millions of its citizens fled on foot. And an economy that once rivaled Europe collapsed by more than 80% in under a decade. This wasn't caused by war. It wasn't caused by natural disaster. And it wasn't caused by a lack of resources. This was self-inflicted. At the center of this collapse stands one man who inherited unimaginable wealth, absolute power, and the easiest economic advantage any nation could ever ask for, and somehow managed to turn it into one of the worst economic disasters in modern history. His name is Nicolas Maduro. But this story isn't just about a dictator, or oil, or sanctions, or socialism. It's about what happens when a nation wins the economic lottery, and the people in charge don't know how to read the ticket. So how did Venezuela go from oil superpower to economic ruin? Was this collapse inevitable, or was it engineered? And is there any realistic path back from the edge? To answer that, we have to start at the moment Maduro took power and inherited a system that was already cracking beneath the surface. When Nicolas Maduro stepped into power in 2013, he did not inherit a poor country. He inherited a nation sitting on the greatest natural resource advantage on the planet. Venezuela was not short on oil, money, or geopolitical leverage. What it lacked, long before Maduro, was a system designed to survive reality. For most of its modern history, Venezuela functioned as a classic petrostate. Oil wasn't just an export, it was the backbone of governance itself. The state collected rent from oil production and redistributed it to maintain political loyalty. When oil prices were high, the system appeared stable. When prices fell, the weaknesses were exposed. This dependency created a political culture where power came not from productivity or institutions, but from controlling access to oil money. That structure intensified under Hugo Chavez. Rising to power in 1999, Chavez positioned himself as the antidote to decades of corruption and inequality. And in many ways, he delivered, at least on the surface. High oil prices in the 2000s allowed Chavez to fund massive social programs, slash poverty rates, and expand healthcare and education. To millions of Venezuelans, it looked like proof that the system worked. But underneath the progress was a dangerous trade-off. Chavez systematically weakened independent institutions and concentrated power in the executive branch. Courts, regulators, and the central bank lost autonomy. State-owned enterprises, especially the national oil company PDVSA, were transformed from technical organizations into political instruments. Loyalty mattered more than competence. Expertise was replaceable. Obedience was not. The illusion held because oil prices kept rising. As long as dollars kept flowing in, Venezuela could import food, medicine, and consumer goods while neglecting domestic production. Currency controls and price caps distorted markets, but oil revenue masked the damage. The economy wasn't growing, it was being carried. By the time Nicolas Maduro was chosen as Chavez's successor, the system had already become dangerously brittle. Maduro was not selected for economic insight or leadership experience. He was selected because he was loyal. A former bus driver and union organizer, Maduro rose through the party ranks by staying close to Chavez and embracing his ideology without question. When Chavez died in 2013, Maduro inherited absolute authority, but none of the personal legitimacy or political skill that had held the system together. Almost immediately, the cracks widened. Maduro attempted to replicate Chavez's rhetoric and policies without adjusting for changing conditions. Oil prices began to soften, but spending continued as if nothing had changed. Subsidies remained untouched. Currency controls stayed rigid. Rather than reform, the government blamed external enemies, accusing businesses, foreign powers, and economic warfare of sabotaging the country. Then came the real test. In 2014, global oil prices collapsed. For countries with savings, diversified economies, or fiscal discipline, it was painful but manageable. For Venezuela, it was catastrophic. The country had no meaningful reserves, no sovereign wealth fund, no buffer of any kind. Oil revenue collapsed, but government spending did not. To fill the gap, the state turned to the only option left: printing money. Inflation began quietly, then accelerated rapidly. Shortages appeared. Black markets flourished. PDVSA, already hollowed out by years of political interference, began to lose production capacity as skilled workers left and maintenance collapsed. Instead of addressing the structural failure, the government doubled down on control, tightening regulations, expanding military involvement in the economy, and suppressing dissent. By the end of Maduro's first years in power, the foundation was gone. The oil engine was failing. Institutions were hollow. Trust in money, governance, and the future was eroding fast. Venezuela was no longer coasting on oil wealth. It was burning through the last fumes of a system that had been cracking for years. And the worst part was this: the collapse had only just begun. Once Venezuela's economic engine stalled, the collapse didn't arrive slowly. It accelerated. What began as inflation quickly turned into hyperinflation, and money itself stopped functioning. Prices doubled, then tripled, then lost all meaning. Salaries became symbolic. Savings were wiped out in weeks. People stopped counting cash and started weighing it. Trust in the currency evaporated, and with it, trust in the state. Daily life inside Venezuela transformed into a survival exercise. Supermarket shelves emptied. Medicines vanished. Electricity became unreliable. Basic necessities were rationed or sold through informal markets at prices most citizens couldn't afford. The black market replaced formal systems, and ordinary people adapted faster than the government ever did. While citizens improvised, the state tightened control. Then came the exodus. Millions of Venezuelans began to leave, creating one of the largest migrations in modern history. Doctors, engineers, teachers, and skilled workers fled first, draining the country of the very people needed to rebuild it. This wasn't just a humanitarian crisis, it was an economic death spiral. Fewer workers meant less production. Less production meant fewer goods. Fewer goods meant more inflation. The system cannibalized itself. As the economy imploded, international sanctions followed. Targeted initially at individuals and institutions tied to corruption and human rights abuses, sanctions became Maduro's favorite explanation for everything that went wrong. But the timeline didn't lie. The collapse began before the harshest sanctions ever arrived. Sanctions didn't cause Venezuela's fall. They accelerated a failure already set in motion. Isolation, however, proved useful. With fewer outside observers and investors, authoritarian control became easier to justify. The greatest irony remained oil. Venezuela still sat atop the largest reserves on Earth, yet production collapsed to a fraction of its former capacity. Infrastructure decayed. Equipment rusted. Skilled workers were gone. Foreign investors stayed away, terrified by expropriation and lawlessness. The country had oil but no capacity to extract it. The ultimate economic paradox. Elections, once a source of legitimacy, became performances. Results were contested. Opposition figures were barred or arrested. International recognition evaporated. Maduro held power but not mandate. And to compensate, the regime leaned further into nationalism, external threats, and manufactured crises. When neighboring Guyana discovered oil, Venezuela threatened annexation. A failing state turned outward, searching for enemies to distract from collapse at home. The comparison to countries like Norway became unavoidable. Both possessed state-owned oil industries. Both had massive reserves. The difference was discipline. Norway built institutions, saved revenue, and planned for the future. Venezuela concentrated power, spent everything immediately, and trusted personalities over systems. One invested, the other consumed. By this point, recovery required trust, in currency, in law, in leadership. Venezuela had none left. Without massive structural change, investment would not return. Talent would not come back. And oil alone could no longer save the country. Nicolas Maduro did not create Venezuela's oil curse, but under his rule, it reached its breaking point. A nation that won the economic lottery burned the ticket, then blamed the world for the fire. And that is how Venezuela crossed the point of no return. Not through a single decision, but through years of choosing control over competence, power over people, and survival over solutions.